All right. Welcome, everyone. And thank you so much for taking the time today to join us for today's webinar on navigating student loans. My name is Nicole Agbayani. I'm the director of the San Francisco Office of Financial Empowerment. We are a small but mighty team that sits under the umbrella of the Treasurer's Office here in San Francisco, and our work is really focused on convening, innovating, and advocating to strengthen the economic security and inclusion of all San Franciscans. We also run a number of programs in support of this mission, including the city's kindergarten to college program, Bank on San Francisco, and our free financial counseling program. For us, student debt has been an important issue for many years now. Approximately 1 in 7 San Franciscans is a student borrower, and like any form of debt, student debt is an economic weight, particularly for those who can least afford to bear it. It really affects folks' ability to accumulate wealth, to access credit, and just exercise as much personal choice as they otherwise could. And I'll say it also feels like for student borrowers, they've kind of been on a bit of a roller coaster since the pandemic when it comes to confusing news, shifting options to take on board. It feels like those can be changing every few months. Particularly under the current federal administration, we've seen one troubling development after another that are extremely harmful for many student borrowers and their families. And so today we're happy that you all are here. You're in the right place. We're really grateful to have experts here to speak with us all from the Student Borrower Protection Center. They are our trusted nonprofit partner who we've worked with on student debt issues for many years. If you've been on our webinars before, I'm sure you'll recognize their name. And the whole goal for today is for them to help us make sense of all the latest developments. And so once again, I want to thank you all for being here on this very important topic, and I'll pass it over to my colleague, Andrea Yee, to get us started.
Great. Thanks so much, Nicole. I just want to, first off, introduce myself. Hello, everyone. My name is Andrea Yee, and I am the Financial Capability Program Manager for the Office of Financial Empowerment. I lead our financial counseling program, and I wanted to remind everyone that if there are questions that you don't get answered today here on this webinar, remember that you can always reach out to us at San Francisco Financial Counseling, which was formerly known as Smart Money Coaching. We provide free one-on-one financial counseling to anyone who lives, works, or receives services in San Francisco. That's regardless of immigration status or income bracket. So if you have specific questions about your student loans that don't get answered today, we encourage you to sign up for a session with one of our financial counselors, and they can meet with you one-on-one and support you to help you navigate your specific student loan situation. I'll go ahead and drop that link in the Q&A section, but I also just wanted to go over a couple of housekeeping items in the meantime. This will be an informative presentation, but please feel free to type your questions through the Q&A function. We'll try to save some, I know we're gonna try to get through a lot of content here, but hopefully at the end we'll have a couple of minutes to address some of the most popular questions. And we'll do our best to address some of the questions as they come in as well. This session is being recorded, and the recording and slides are going to be made available to everyone who registered for this event. And so without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce you to today's presenters. As Nicole mentioned, they are joining us from the Student Borrower Protection Center, whose mission is to protect borrowers and halt widespread abuses by the student loan industry. They lead a nationwide effort with innovative partnerships and projects to bring together experts and leaders for student research, investigation, and trainings, as well as to expose how student debt and predatory practices exacerbate racial and economic disparities. Spearheading their outreach and advocacy work is Amy Colada. Sorry, I'm totally butchering your name there. But she is the Outreach and Advocacy Manager at the Student Borrower Protection Center, where she is engaged in a lot of its PSLF waiver education and outreach work. Prior to that, her work on student debt prior to her work on student debt issues, she was in the labor movement conducting research for a large East Coast union representing property service workers. We also have Jacob Dumez, who is a fellow with the Student Borrower Protection Center, where his work focuses on city and local government partnerships. Jacob previously spent over a decade with the San Francisco Office of Financial Empowerment, and his areas of expertise include consumer banking and payments, child savings accounts, guaranteed income, and student loan debt. Jacob graduated from Princeton University and received his Master in Public Policy from the Goldman School of Public Policy at UC Berkeley. Jacob, Amy, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much, Andrea and Nicole. We're really excited to be here with you today. As Andrea mentioned, just wanted to say a little bit about the Student Borrower Protection Center at the top. So we are a national nonprofit policy organization that focuses solely on alleviating the burden of student debt across the country. We do this through a mixture of advocacy, policy making, and litigation to rein in industry abuses, protect borrowers' rights, and advance economic opportunity for the next generation of students. We're really excited to be here with you today. We hope to get a number of your questions answered at the end. Just a note on that is that we can't give legal advice, but we find that most questions can be answered through general program information. And I guess with that, I can maybe go over the agenda and then pass it to my colleague, Jacob.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
That's me. I've got to advance the slides here. 1 second.
All good. So we're going to be talking about a number of things today. First, we're going to give you a landscape of the student debt system right now and what it looks like, an overview of federal student loan policy. Then we'll review some programs available to federal student loan borrowers like income-driven repayment, public service loan forgiveness, and then we'll also go over what you should do or what you can do if you're in default before getting to your questions. So thanks again, and I'll just pass it off to Jacob.
Thanks so much, Amy. Before I move to the next slide, I just want to say it's so great to, if not physically, then virtually be back with my San Francisco people. I miss it a lot. So going to talk we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about data and talking about the student debt crisis as a whole with its background. I think, as the name implies, it's really is a crisis situation for student loan borrowers and has been for some time. I just did want to start, though, by reflecting on really important research that SFOFE partnered on with the San Francisco Federal Reserve prior to the pandemic. And that debt really looked at not just the national landscape, but down to the zip code level. What does it look like for borrowing repayment outcomes in San Francisco and throughout the Bay Area? And as you can see here, we've really seen huge increases in student debt burden since 2003 that will have continued. The trend lines really continue, people borrowing more, more people going to college, and worse repayment outcomes. The communities that have been hit the hardest, unfortunately, tend to be borrowers in low-income neighborhoods, as well as Black and Hispanic communities. And found that the problem, while it's really difficult for people with huge, let's say, six-figure debts and the big student loan debt, really high delinquency and default for low balance borrowers in particular. Now, on the national level, before the pandemic, and we had this pause, 1 in 5 borrowers was in default. One borrower going into default every 26 seconds. And the reason that we know that that hasn't unfortunately gone away through our pause after the pandemic, throughout the pandemic, is that the statistics now are showing that more than 6 million borrowers are currently in default, and we're on track to have more than 10 million borrowers by the end of the year. Only a little more than a third of borrowers overall are on track with repayment, keeping up with their payments, and we're seeing the highest delinquency rates ever experienced in this country. So definitely stark. But we mostly want to focus on what you need to know to handle your loans. So we will continue right on into federal student loan policy. So how did we get here to where we are kind of dealing with these issues today? And this is a very brief version. I just talked about the status quo before the pandemic, which really wasn't great. And then we had this extended pause where a lot of people didn't really have to think about their student loans. And during that time, under the Biden administration, a number of substantive reforms were proposed. Broad-based debt cancellation, a new most affordable ever repayment plan called SAVE, fixes to public service loan forgiveness, and a very important income-driven repayment account adjustment. We'll talk about those more later. We also had this on-ramp to repayment. That was the year that is now ended, but that was the year after repayment continued, where if you missed payments, there was no reporting to credit bureaus, or there was no default, there was no collections. So here we are. Those crucial protections have ended. And so now when you're delinquent, your delinquency is reported to credit bureaus after 3 months of missed payments. Collections have resumed for defaulted borrowers, and we'll talk about those things coming up. Unfortunately, as we all, I think, are aware, the broad-based cancellation under President Biden was struck down by the Supreme Court. And in a different way through the courts, the SAVE plan was blocked by litigation by right-wing states represented by their attorneys general. There are, as a result of that litigation, and as a result certainly of the administration change, fewer income-driven repayment options currently available. So as I mentioned, collections have resumed on defaulted loans for the first time in 5 years. That collections, which we get into a little more detail at the end, include what's called the Treasury Offset Program. That is how the federal government recoups what they think they're recouping, I guess is a weird word to use, by taking some of your federal benefits that has typically included Social Security, importantly, and your tax refunds. And garnishment of wages is set to begin later this summer. So people are really feeling the pain of this. Borrowers, what they can do, they can rehabilitate or consolidate to get out of default. We'll talk about that more. And they can raise defenses, including financial hardship, if they need to reduce or stop that kind of involuntary debt collection that they're experiencing. Right now, though, and particularly if you're keeping up with payments or if you're in a delinquency but not in default, enrolling in income-driven repayment, even under limited options, is really the best and most important thing that you can do. IDR bases payments on your income and your family size so that you can reduce your payments to as low as $0 a month if you are low income. The 3 IDR plans currently available, which we'll talk more about, are called income-based repayment, or IBR, income contingent repayment, ICR, and pay as you earn, or pay. Forgiveness is built into each of these plans after 20 to 25 years, depending. But right now, it's only available under the IBR plan. And so what it means for other borrowers is that you are placed into a forbearance period after you've reached those payments that you need to make, but you are not going to have debt forgiven. You're sort of pending. You're in this limbo phase. IBR does have debt forgiven if you reach that period. There was this time, unfortunately, for a number of months, spanning administrations, where the processing of applications for IDR was paused. It has resumed now, but there is an immense backlog of applications, millions of applications that they need to go through, so it will take some time. What happens when you enroll in IDR now, at least what should happen, is that you get placed in a processing forbearance that counts towards forgiveness credits that you need for public service loan forgiveness and IDR. So you're placed in that for 60 days and then should be placed in an administrative forbearance until you're processed. That's what's happening, and we'll talk about that more with SAVE borrowers. We've also seen now attacks on borrowers in the student loan system through the courts, which we talked about, that SAVE litigation, which is having effects on the other repayment plans that are available. Congress right now, the Senate, is taking up a reconciliation budget that the House has already passed. There'll be some slight adjustments to that. We'll touch on a couple of things. That process is underway. And the White House is going through a process through the Department of Education of what's called negotiated rulemaking, which also proposes to make substantive and really not great changes to public service loan forgiveness and IDR. I talked about the SAVE plan, the most affordable plan that was created. Unfortunately, because of the court actions, the SAVE plan is currently blocked. Litigation is ongoing, so it's still working its way through the courts. You can't apply to SAVE right now, but 8 million borrowers are already in the plan, and they are, as I mentioned, in this administrative forbearance. So they don't have to make payments. There's no interest accruing, but they don't get credit towards forgiveness. Thank goodness, borrowers who did have their debt canceled through SAVE already, there was especially a large number of people with lower balances who were able to have their debt canceled, will not have that reinstated. Thank goodness. Mentioned the reconciliation process, the budget process that the Republicans are using in the Congress, and that is currently sitting in the Senate. It proposes huge, immense cuts to federal student aid programs, as you can see. It also caps the loan amounts that borrowers and families can take out. It eliminates the whole set of existing income-driven repayment plans and sets up one sort of income-driven plan, or if you could call it that, called the Repayment Assistance Plan, and that's much more expensive for borrowers. It also, really crucially, will cut Pell funding. Pell grants go to the lowest income borrowers who are attending college. It's crucial for a lot of people to get to and through college. It will reduce that amount and cut some people out entirely, and also cut other protections. And I talked about negotiated rulemaking. This is where people need to come to the table. It's a process driven by the Department of Education, and really an effort to gut income-driven repayment plans. We will see if Congress acts first and negotiated rulemaking becomes a relatively unnecessary step for the White House, or what the order of operations is. Where it says here, weaponizing public service loan forgiveness, it's really ugly. It's basically that if they deem that your public service work, that your nonprofit or local government or state government that you work for is not in lockstep with what the Trump administration wants to see, is making statements that they don't like, is, for example, dabbling in immigration policy, et cetera, then they will say, well, you don't actually qualify as a public service servant, and you will not be able to be eligible for PSLF. Seems like a clear First Amendment violation, among other things. So that is going to happen. There will be a first session at the end of June into the beginning of July. We still don't know exactly who these negotiators are at the table, but we hope that there are some good folks representing borrowers and advocates. Okay, I'm going to pass it over to you, Amy.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. So we wanted to talk a little bit about income-driven repayment. And when you have a federal student loan, there are several types of repayment plans that you can access in order to pay them back. If you could just go to the next slide. So when you graduate or leave school, you typically have a 6-month grace period where you're not required to make any payments on your loan. After that time, you're automatically placed into something called the standard plan. That's this top left-hand corner here. This has you paying off the amount of the loan over 10 years. And so, if your loan balance is quite high, your monthly payments could be quite high. There are also a couple other different repayment plans, like the extended repayment plan, which has you paying off your loan over an extended amount of time, up to 25 years. And also the graduated repayment plan, this bottom left-hand corner, that starts out with your payments very low, and then they can increase over time throughout the term of your loan. We're going to spend the majority of our time talking about this bottom right-hand corner called income-driven repayment. The nice thing about income-driven repayment is that as your income increases, your payments increase. But if you also, suffer kind of an emergency, like maybe you lose your job or something, you can recertify your income, and you could qualify for something as low as a $0 monthly payment. This is the world as it stands right now. Of course, like I know Jacob mentioned all the changes that are kind of coming down the pike or might be coming down the pike, but this is what is kind of available to folks right now. And so in addition to maybe, folks being able to access a $0 monthly payment, the nice thing about income-driven repayment plans is that your remaining balance is forgiven after 20 or 25 years in repayment. And if you're seeking something like public service loan forgiveness, which I'll talk about in a little bit, that remaining balance is canceled after 10 years if you're seeking the PSLF program. As Jacob mentioned, there are currently 3 income-driven repayment plans that you can apply for and have access to. And they're the first 3 listed here, that ICR, IBR, and PAY plans. These plans are all different, and they calculate your income in different ways. And so, you could get a sense of what you might pay under each plan using the loan simulator tool at studentaid.gov. And as Jacob mentioned, IBR is the only plan that's currently offering cancellation. He also mentioned the Saving on a Valuable Education Plan, or the SAVE plan, that is blocked in court right now. Folks are in a forbearance, and that forbearance time does not count towards IDR cancellation or PSLF cancellation. If you are interested in having your payments count, making payments and having your payments count towards PSLF, you'll need to apply for a new plan and get into a different plan. And as Jacob mentioned too, that processing time is quite long right now just because of the backlog. But those are some options if you're in the forbearance and you want to get out of it and start making payments towards PSLF. The next slide, please. Okay, yeah, the IDR account adjustment. So just a note on something called the IDR account adjustment. So as I mentioned, after 20 or 25 years in repayment, the idea with income-driven repayment plans is that the remainder of your debt will be canceled after that time. A few reports came out a few years ago that servicers had no way of tracking this. They weren't figuring out how much time people had accrued in repayment. They were often steering people into forbearances and deferments rather than offering them income-driven repayment plans, which may have kept their payments much lower and kept them on track towards these kind of cancellation timelines. To rectify this, the Biden administration announced the IDR account adjustment. It's basically a one-time audit of all accounts. This happened in droves, and so you might have heard during the Biden administration that thousands of people had gotten their debt canceled. In many cases, that was happening through the IDR account adjustment, several times over the course of a year and a half or so. This happened for the last time in 2024, and so in addition to having any time counted that you were in repayment, it also counted some other time. So some forbearances counted, some deferments counted, and you were able to keep your credit that you gained towards IDR cancellation or towards PSLF if you consolidated your loans, which we can talk about a little bit in the PSLF section. And so all to say that there was a tracker up on your studentaid.gov account during the Biden administration that would have told you how much time you had accrued over for IDR. And this, we found out today, is being reinstated. And so pretty soon, hopefully, studentaid.gov accounts will reflect how much time you've accrued towards this IDR account adjustment. And all this time is eligible for PSLF credit, and it's eligible for IDR cancellation as well. And so it basically gets you more time towards these cancellation thresholds. All right, next slide. Okay, so next we're going to spend some time on public service loan forgiveness. Public service loan forgiveness is a federal program that was enacted by Congress in October of 2007. And basically, it's a program where if you work in the public service for 10 years, the remainder of your debt will be canceled after working that amount of time and making payments on your student loans. There are typically 4 requirements for the PSLF program. First, you have to have the right type of loan, which is a direct loan. The second is that you need to be in the right type of repayment plan, which in most cases, for most people, will be the IDR plans that are most affordable. Third, you need to be in the right type of employment, which is a public service employer, and you need to be working there at least 30 hours a week. And then fourth, you need to make the right number of payments, which is 120 payments or 10 years of payments while meeting all the other requirements. Let's dig into each of these requirements a little bit more. So the first one is having the right type of loan. Only direct loans are eligible for PSLF. Direct loans have been the main loan type in the federal system since 2010. So if you took out a loan since 2010, it likely already qualifies. It's likely already a direct loan. If you took out a loan prior to 2010, it's possible you might have one of these older loans, like a Federal Family Education or Loan Program or a FFELP loan or a Perkins loan. These are eligible to consolidate. Consolidation is basically a process that happens with the Department of Education where you take out a new loan, you pay off the old loan, the old FFELP or Perkins loan, and it gets replaced with a new direct loan. It's like refinancing, but it's with the federal government, and so it's not the same as refinancing. Refinancing happens on the private market. Consolidation happens within the federal system. You're able to do that at studentaid.gov. The consolidation process is pretty quick. It takes about 30 minutes online, and then your loan could be eligible for PSLF. Parent Plus loans are also eligible for public service loan forgiveness. Most folks have to consolidate in order to access the income-driven repayment plans. But in some cases, the standard plan might be a bit cheaper for Parent Plus loan borrowers. I can get to that on a different slide too. In addition, if you consolidate, remember that I mentioned during the IDR account adjustment, if you consolidated your loans to make them eligible for PSLF, you could keep all of your credit. In the past, you couldn't keep any credit. You basically started the clock again at 0 when you consolidated your loans to make them eligible for PSLF. And so in 2024, there was a rulemaking, or I'm sorry, in 2024, it went into effect that you'll now receive a weighted average of qualifying payments if you consolidate into a direct loan to access PSLF. This changed in 2024, essentially like after the last drove of the IDR account adjustment. And so, now you're able to get a weighted average of qualifying payments. Okay. Let's go to requirement 2, which is being in the right type of repayment plan. So in most cases, those income-driven repayment plans are going to be the best option for folks in the public service loan forgiveness program. In some cases, you could have a $0 monthly payment depending on your income. Remember that those payment plans are ICR, IBR, and PAY that are available to folks right now. And IBR is the only one that is currently granting cancellation because of some of the court cases. Another option for folks is the 10-year standard repayment plan. And if you remember, that's the plan that you're automatically placed into when you graduated or leave school, and it has you paying off the entire balance over 10 years. So for some folks, this is where the calculator comes into play, because for some folks, the 10-year standard plan might be more affordable than the income-driven repayment plans, particularly for Parent Plus borrowers. For Parent Plus borrowers, the only payment plan, the only income-driven repayment plan that they are eligible for is the ICR plan. Unfortunately, it's the least generous of the income-driven repayment plans. And so for Parent Plus borrowers, it comes down to figuring out if the ICR plan payments are more affordable than the 10-year standard plan payments. And given that, maybe you were working for a nonprofit or government agency during the time of the pandemic when you had a payment pause, it might be cheaper to stay on the standard plan at that point. That's kind of a decision that I would say particularly Parent Plus borrowers would need to consider when it comes to the repayment plans for PSLF. Next, we'll get into the third requirement, which is the right type of employment. So it matters who's on your W-2. You can work for a government organization, a 501c3 nonprofit. Certain other nonprofits also qualify, something like emergency services that might not fall under the umbrella of a city or a county, but is obviously doing work for the public good, kind of usually falls into that third category. And so that's the type of work that you must do. You also must work full-time, which is considered 30 hours a week for the purposes of PSLF. And you can combine multiple part-time jobs if you have 2 different jobs that will get you over the 30 hours a week threshold. It's just a matter of filling out multiple forms for those multiple jobs in order to log that work and make sure you get credit for it. Next slide is the right number of payments. So you need to make 120 payments or 10 years worth of payments, and they have to be made in full. Partial payments need to be within 15 days of the due date. You can make lump sum payments, but only up to 12 months. So you can't pay like 10 years ahead of time. You'd have to do it in 1-year increments. And then just a reminder here that those months of the payment pause during the pandemic counted towards the 120 payments. And so if you were working for a government agency or a 501c3 nonprofit during that time, you're able to bank all of that time for PSLF. And so, that was some good news on the pandemic front. Okay, so that's a little bit about PSLF. I know that was a lot of information. We can definitely take questions at the end if there are some. Next, we're just going to get into what you can do if you're in default and what default is. This is something that we haven't really had to think about for the past 5 years or so. And so, I think we're all in need of a refresher. So just a reminder that delinquency is essentially when you haven't made a payment on your student loan for 3 months. So, they can report that to credit bureaus after 90 days of missed payments. You're not considered in default until after 270 days. So you have to have, you wouldn't have made payments for 9 months, and then you're considered in default. And it's a lot easier to help someone before they enter default. So if you're, somewhere between that 3-month mark and that 9-month mark, it's a really critical time to start paying attention to what's going on, because you're able to maintain your eligibility for deferments or forbearances and other repayment plans, which you might not have as an option once you get into default. In addition, so default itself can be really damaging for folks. So it damages your credit. You're able to be collected on. You're able to be sued for being in default. You can also get denied federal aid to go back to school, for instance, if you're interested in that. The collection costs can be astronomical, up to 25%. And the government has really extraordinary collection powers. They can basically pursue you forever. And they can take your tax refunds, they can, garnish your wages, and then offset your federal benefits like Social Security and other things. And so, the consequences of default cannot be overstated, I think. So basically, if you're trying to get out of default, you have 2 real options. The first is to consolidate your loans. You have a limited number of times that you can consolidate your loans. But you can do that at studentaid.gov. Again, that's a process that takes about 30 minutes and, is pretty straightforward online. This, in most cases, will probably be the best option for folks. The second option is to rehabilitate your loans. You can only use this option one time, and you have to do, and it's a bit of an onerous process, so bear with me. So you have to go through the default resolution group or your guarantee agency if you have one of those older FFELP loans. You basically have to make 9 payments over a 10-month period that either equal 15% of your discretionary income or a negotiated amount based on your expenses. So they're going to monitor you for 10 months while you make these 9 payments to make sure that you can actually make them. And then once the rehabilitation process is completed, your loan will then be transferred to a servicer to be put on a payment plan. So, in comparison to consolidation, like this is a much more intensive kind of situation for folks, and time intensive too. Just a note on the next slide. So there are a couple more options. So, just to mention that it is possible to pay the balance of your loan to get out of default. We realize that that's not an option for most folks. You could also negotiate a settlement. That's possible. I wouldn't say it's like probable. Some other things to consider here are that you could look into some of the cancellation programs. So borrowers who qualify for closed school discharge and disability discharge are often disproportionately in default. And so those are 2 options to kind of make sure that you understand the requirements of, and if you meet the requirements, certainly apply for those first. You also will be able to stop or reduce involuntary collection by raising defenses like identity theft or financial hardship. It's not impossible, but it's certainly hard to do. Another thing I want to mention is that for some folks, getting out of default might not be possible. Maybe you've exhausted all of your consolidation and rehabilitation options, or getting out of default might not be the best course of action, especially if you're likely to default again. So if nothing about your financial situation has changed to make you able to make payments, then maybe being in default for a bit longer is the best option in some cases. And so just want to, state the reality for some folks, unfortunately, is that might be the case. I think this is, I'll turn it back over to Jacob. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Amy. And folks, I know we're moving through it pretty fast, but I think we'll have some good time allotted for some Q&A, and Amy and I can fill in anything that we missed here. So we did want to have a note on once you're in default, what is the deal with collections, with debt collection from your default? So how does the government do this? First of all, we've said it a couple of times, but it hasn't come up for 5 years, but it resumed in May for the first time. So federal agencies have, as we've said, they call it offsetting your benefits and other payments. Essentially, they're seizing them. I'm calling out kind of some of the key ways that they collect on this. One has been that they would take a portion of your Social Security payments. The amazing thing is, two very important notes here. This was set to be devastating for older Americans. It was probably the first wave of people who are going to see collections on this, who are going to start having the payments, their monthly payments that they depended on, taken from them with very little protected. And a lot of people made a lot of noise. A lot of borrowers spoke up. A lot of advocate organizations like our own spoke up and really pointed out how awful this has been and would continue to be, particularly now. And Secretary McMahon at the Department of Education did announce we're going to put a pause on that for now. That was just a week or two ago that they did that. So first we were told that, and then Secretary McMahon had a meeting just in the last couple of days with Senator Elizabeth Warren, who's been a real champion for student loan borrowers. And in that meeting, and Senator Warren's staff was sure to put out a press release right away to document what had been said. In that meeting, surprisingly, Secretary McMahon said, I agree that this is a bad practice right now and it should not happen, and it will not happen under my leadership. So at this point, we only have her word for it, but that's super important to hear from this administration in particular, that we may not have Social Security benefits collected on for at least the next several years. We should all keep an eye on it, but that's very good news. The other things, however, that can be collected on and are not paused are your tax refunds. They can take your entire tax refund. And thank goodness, the way the timing worked out for this year, at least, when they restarted in May, many people, probably most people, had already received their tax refunds for this past tax year. So if you filed late, you may get that refund seized, unfortunately, if you're in a default situation. And they only really have to notice you once on this, and you can get your tax refunds seized year after year as you remain in default. They also, if you're a federal worker, can take federal salary and benefits, a portion of those, and certain other benefits as well. And we mentioned a couple of times taking some of your wages that you earn at your work. That is expected to resume maybe sometime this summer, certainly later this year. And in brief, what really happens is, at least under this administration, we know emails did go out to borrowers, the 5 to 6 million borrowers who were in default as we resumed collections, telling them to take action before they got collected on, sort of a last chance. And in general, you should receive notice prior to the initiation of this process. And through that notice, you have an opportunity to respond and at least pause and prevent the collection from happening. As I mentioned, there's only one notice issued for tax seizures, so they won't tell you the following year, year after that, and the year after that, but they may still seize your taxes. You have to remember that. Again, after you go through that notice process, once collections happens, they will take an amount of your money. That's 15% of federal benefits like Social Security and others, 15% of your discretionary income. We've talked about discretionary income a couple of times. In the student loan setting, the government does this thing where they say, well, first of all, we'll give you some basic amount you need to live on, and we'll say that's 150% of the federal poverty level. Now, certainly in San Francisco, but really most places that you live anywhere in this country right now, 150% of the federal poverty level, which is very low, is not actually enough to get by on. But nonetheless, that is what they set aside. And the remainder that you make above that is what's called discretionary income. So that's used for income-driven repayment plans. It's also used in this setting for taking discretionary income through wage garnishment. And as I mentioned, they can take all of your tax refunds. There are some limited protections from this offset or seizure process. For Social Security, and again, on pause now, but for Social Security, if they were to resume seizing that money, they only protect $750 a month or $9,000 a year, and the government can seize payments above that amount. And again, no more than 15% of the total benefit can be offset. Important to note that SSI benefits cannot be taken because any means-tested benefits are protected. So SNAP, TANF, WIC, other forms of public benefits that people may be receiving are protected, thank goodness. And there is a sort of a challenge potential here. that when you receive that notice, it's important to act quickly because you can request a review or a hearing, usually they're virtual or paper hearings, to hold off the offset process. You can continue to challenge if you don't act quickly enough, like say within the first 60 days, but you challenge it later, you can still raise a challenge, but that garnishment or that benefits seizure is going to continue to happen most likely while you go through the challenge process. Most people are probably going to challenge for reasons of financial hardship or disability. Some may challenge because they're eligible for loan discharge, as Amy mentioned, closed school or borrower defense to repayment, which means, let's say your school, maybe a for-profit school, defrauded you, and you can raise a defense that said my degree is actually worthless. There are, or more limited reasons, like, as Amy mentioned, identity theft and other things. Throughout this process, particularly if you get to collections, but also if you are in trouble at all with your student loans, I want to really reiterate what Nicole and Andrea said up at the top. You are in a good position relative to a lot of people in this country because you have SFOFE and a host of fantastic nonprofit partners who are ready and able to step into the breach and to meet you one-on-one and give you really trusted, great advice. So if you receive a collections notice, but probably before at any point that you're like really like, I'm confused, I need help, reach out, get into financial coaching, get referred to legal aid if you need it. And that's really where we're going to wrap up here with Q&A. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Amy, I'm going to put you on the spot too. I'm going to put both of us in the spotlight here for the moment. I guess I wanted to, before we started taking questions, and you can raise your hand, but also dropping them into the Q&A at the top of your screen is a great way to do that. I wanted to mention a couple of things just about borrower experience right now, things that you may be like, are you recognizing how awful this is? Because we know that, okay, you are trying to make a payment. Many people who are not making payments are like trying to figure out, what am I supposed to do? Where does the payment go? I'm getting one piece of information from my loan servicer, the third party that holds, my loan and deals with me, and another from studentaid.gov through FSA, the part of the federal government and Department of Education that deals with that. We just want to fully acknowledge that that is really awful. Our colleagues are doing as much as they can in DC and at the state level to try and shine a light on this and halt these sort of ugly servicing processes that are happening to people. But that may happen. And you may, when you want to get a question answered, you may be like, oh, I have to call Mohila or Aidvantage or one of these other servicers. And particularly in the case of Mohila, as the data holds out, you can wait for hours and hours and hours. So I don't have an answer for you there other than to say, get help with financial coaching or legal aid, but also to highlight that there are other resources in different states. And in California, you have a Department of Financial Protection and Innovation, that is the state financial regulator, and they have a student loan ombudsman person. So Selena is your ombuds person. I'm sorry. She's a wonderful person and I don't have her last name at hand. But you have this resource, right? And so the financial coaches can help you to get to the ombuds person. And that's another place where you can say, I feel like there's something unfair or maybe even illegal happening with what my servicer is doing to me. I got moved from a plan that I didn't ask to be moved from, or moved into a plan, or the amount that they're saying I owe is incorrect. That can be a really important place right now to take those complaints and try to get them worked on. So those are the couple of things I wanted to add. Amy, I don't know if you have anything else to add. I think I did see a hand go up though.
No worries. I think the ombudsman's name is Selena Damian. So
Selena Damian, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
I think I saw someone raise their hand while I was yammering on, but then it went away. If this is a good time, I feel like, and we have a lot of people on here, but you want to raise your hand and unmute yourself. Andrea, I assume that's something they can do. So I see a raised hand there, El Amadi. If you want to unmute yourself and ask the question, and if you're having a problem doing that, maybe drop it into the Q&A. And if
Yeah,
For
so
some,
I don't think that folks can unmute themselves for this webinar, but there are a number of questions in the Q&A. Are you and Amy able to see the Q&A, or should I just go ahead and read some of those questions out?
oh, I had to like reload. There's all the activity. I can now see them. Okay, I can probably take that, Andrea. Feel free to jump
Okay.
in. But so first question for PSLF. Amy, I'll pose this to you. Can you say more about qualifying employment beyond government jobs in 501c3? Generally, what type of jobs qualify? Maybe if you could give a couple of examples.
Yeah, sure. So really, it is mostly government and 501c3 jobs that qualify. There is, again, that third bucket of folks that usually fall under something like emergency services. It's framed as certain other nonprofits is how it's kind of the language that they use. But it in most cases is like emergency services for a government, maybe you're just not working directly for the government or for directly a nonprofit, but that is the work that is seen as like eligible for public service. And so unfortunately, like beyond those two categories, again, it's like not really about the work that you're actually doing. It matters who's on your W-2 form. And so if it's not a government or a 501c3 nonprofit, then it likely doesn't qualify.
Yeah, I think the other minor example I've seen, Amy, is related to emergency services, which is do their healthcare work with maybe a third-party agency that's in this nebulous space. You're not officially DPH, you're not officially with the hospital, but you're part of offering a public health service, and so that can sometimes be wrapped in. The next question is about contact number for MOHELA or ombudsperson contact. Nicole dropped in the ombudsperson contact. Thank you, Nicole. And what I would say, this is a good reminder about just some very basic steps for people to take if you're really working through this. Make sure you're logging into your account at studentaid.gov. If you've forgotten your information, there's ways to find it and make sure that you get in. So log in, take a look at everything, update your contact information. That's really important, particularly if you're late on your payments. You need to be able to get the notices that they're trying to send you. And that is also where you can look for who is my loan servicer and how do I contact them. In fact, so if MOHELA is your servicer, it should list that right on your dashboard at studentaid.gov. You can even click over and go to the servicer's external site to reach that. Next question. I recently started a job with government organization and was unemployed and in forbearance. I have not made any significant payments, but recently made a few and was wondering if I qualify for PSLF loans. Amy, you want to try to take that?
Yeah, sure. So one thing I forgot to mention is that you can essentially get your name on the books for PSLF at any point in time. We recommend that you actually fill out the paperwork once a year and every time that you switch jobs, just to make sure that you're on track for PSLF. There were so many problems with this program when it was first rolled out. So, it started in 2007. By the time 2017 rolled around, when that first kind of those first people should have been getting debt cancellation. They found all sorts of problems that they had one of those older FFELP loans and they needed to consolidate, and they were never told by their servicer that they needed to consolidate to access PSLF, things like that. And so it's better to get on top of this early, and that way you can catch any mistakes that are made as they happen in real time. And so if you just started your job at the county, you could submit your public service loan forgiveness form at studentaid.gov. This is using the PSLF help tool. It's really easy. You just log into studentaid.gov, you put in your employer's identification number, and then they would pop up on the screen, and you just kind of log the dates that you've worked there so far. So at any time you can kind of certify your employment in that way to be eligible for PSLF. And you can also put in work that you've done in the past. So basically any work since 2007 that you've done in a government agency or a nonprofit qualifies. So you might as well get that time on the books and certify your employment itself. The payment counts will be kind of done separately. And so it's just to better cover all your bases on the employment side, log every moment of time that you've had a government service job or a nonprofit job. Anything to add there, Jacob?
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think the next question actually touches on this too. So just want to underline, you can go back at any point and fill out PSLF forms for any previous employment whether it's a different employer or the same employer you're with now, as Amy said, all the way back to 2007. This next question calls out the sort of some problems and information gap with the changeover via MOHELA. So yes, you may have noticed this. What was the case for a while is that MOHELA, this private, mostly private, nebulous government ties, this loan servicer had the sole contract to deal with public service loan forgiveness. So if you were in once you got into PSLF, you were a MOHELA borrower. The government changed the way they contracted with loan servicers and the way that they wanted people to interact with the loan servicing platforms, so that now they really try to funnel everyone through studentaid.gov, and you may actually end up on the back end with a number of different loan servicers. But I agree with you, there were all sorts of problems with MOHELA that continue, and certainly were some issues with that changeover to the new servicing environment. But the bottom line is, do go in and check, and hopefully soon keep checking, because hopefully soon that IDR payment count tracker is going to go back up. You won't see anything there until you are enrolled in an IDR plan for a period of time, or on the PSLF side until you've at least filled in one PSLF form. But once those get processed, you will start to see that number. And it's good to see because, as Amy has pointed out, 3+ years of pandemic credit going to everyone who was, borrower during that time, and the account adjustment that gave time to people who were just in the wrong plan or didn't make the right payment or didn't make a payment at all, but otherwise met these requirements. That was a lot of chunk of time that all of a sudden can add up, and you can be a lot closer than you thought you were. Okay, will payments during an administrative processing forbearance count towards PSLF? Very good question. So we talked about two different kinds of forbearances that people typically might be in once they're in this IDR or PSLF world. One is the initial processing forbearance. That only lasts a couple of months, and that's when you apply for an IDR plan. That one counts. Those 2 months, unfortunately, it's just 2 months, but that time counts. Once you're in the administrative forbearance, so you're mixing administrative and processing there in the question, but I want to be clear. Processing counts. Administrative forbearance, which is anything after those first 60 days, or all the time if you're sitting in this save limbo, that unfortunately does not count towards your payment counts for cancellation. And I use forgiveness sometimes because I am stuck, we have these two worlds. I like that my colleagues really emphasize it as loan cancellation here. But when you hear people say loan forgiveness and loan cancellation, they're talking about essentially the same thing.
Another thing to mention on that front, on the forbearance side. So if you are one of those people that is in the save forbearance right now because of these court cases, so you're not able to make payments and you're not getting credit towards PSLF or IDR cancellation, but you want to. So maybe you want to get out of that forbearance. You want to get on an IDR plan to start making payments so that you can collect that PSLF time. You can submit an IDR application, and then after that, you could, which is something that I actually recently did, you could call your servicer right away and say, I submitted this IDR application. I'd like to be put on a processing forbearance. And you need to make sure that you request that processing forbearance so that the next few months while they review your IDR application, you can get that time to count towards PSLF, because otherwise it's possible that they might just leave you in the administrative forbearance and not actively put you in a processing forbearance. And so I would just do the due diligence of calling them. I know it's annoying and it takes forever to get a hold of anyone, but to just try to get on that processing forbearance to get that time to count too.
Yeah. And it is a time, folks, that unfortunately it's incumbent on us to stand up for ourselves. So keep all the correspondence you get, keep those emails, take screenshots periodically of what's in your studentaid.gov account just to protect yourself. I'm going to skip ahead to a question Evan asks. It got a few kind of upvotes here, and it's a good one for folks whose payments are paused because they're in the SAVE plan. When do you recommend we start to apply to an income-driven plan? And maybe I'll start and then hand it over to you, Amy. I think the answer there is it depends to an extent. So if you are in a position of having trouble making payments on your loans full stop, then it may not be the worst thing to be in this forbearance under SAVE. Yes, you're in limbo, and know you're not making progress towards cancellation, but you're not having to make payments and the loan amount is not increasing. But if you're wanting to get into a plan because you're like, I actually think I'm pretty close to PSLF forgiveness or IDR forgiveness, and I want to get it, I want to start making those payments, I want to get credit towards those, then any time is really a good time to go ahead and do that. There's no real date to wait for on that front. You can go ahead, take a minute. I'll say resources. We have a couple of websites, protectborrowers.org and cancelmystudentdebt.org. Cancelmystudentdebt.org is a website oriented towards borrowers, but unfortunately at the moment we need to do some updates, so it's a little bit dated. The information there, still valid information, but just a little bit dated. National Consumer Law Center is another place to go to get good in-depth information. If you want to compare loan plans, that's a really good one. And that's studentloanborrowerassistance.org. It's a long one, but studentloanborrowerassistance.org. We can include some of these in the follow-up. So anytime is a good time, Evan. Amy, anything to add there?
No, that's perfect. Yep, totally agree.
Let's see. I know we're coming up on time, but I think we have time for a couple more. Can a loan be paid off? Marcia asks, or Marcia asks, can a loan be paid off without prepayment penalty when you are already enrolled in a plan? Amy? I don't believe there's a prepayment penalty involved. If you all of a sudden wanted to say, I just want to pay off my loans, they're not going to penalize you, right?
I don't think so. I've never heard of that. We can double check, but I've never heard of that either.
No, and I've known people who did that, who at some point just said, I need to get out from under this. Sad, it sounds great to have the money to do that. Sadly, it's often a case of well, there goes the money we were saving for a house sometime in the future, or there goes the money we were saving for some other important thing. And that's tough, but no prepayment penalties. And then Kim asks, with financial hardship, does owing money on taxes count toward discretionary income? Amy, correct me if I'm wrong. So when you're challenging, so discretionary income, in what context is, I suppose, the question there, Kim? If it's for applying for an income-driven repayment plan and how they calculate what you owe, owing money on taxes isn't going to come into the play there. It's just the income that's income you report on your taxes. Right, Amy?
Yeah, I think that's right.
But from a financial hardship perspective, because I know that was in your question. So if you're saying, don't collect on this debt, don't seize my tax refunds or garnish my wages, I'm in a position of financial hardship. I think there what you're doing is, first of all, talking to a coach, talking to legal aid, don't go it yourself. But essentially what they're going to do is look at your money coming in and money going out, your expenses versus what your income. And if your income is lower than what your expenses are, right? If you're just kind of constantly underwater, I think that is kind of along the lines of the test that they're looking for, but get help in that scenario. All right, I have couple more questions. Can we add the website link? There's a couple of websites we mentioned. I will see if I can tap in a thing here, ask a question and just do, so cancelmystudentdebt.org, student loan borrower assistance.org are the two I'm just going to do right now. And I put them without the www. You can figure that out, but we'll follow up with y'all for some of this. What plan should you apply for? Kayla asks if you want PSLF. Amy, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So for most folks, the most affordable options are going to be those IDR plans that we mentioned. So those are three: income contingent repayment, income-based repayment, or pay as you earn. Those are the three income-driven repayment plans that are probably going to be the most affordable. They're all different, and so they all calculate your income differently, and your family size and all those things. And so trying to get a sense of how much you might pay under each plan. You could look to NCLC, as Jacob mentioned. You could also look at the loan repayment simulator tool at studentaid.gov to try to get a sense of how much you would pay. In addition, you could also stay on the standard plan, but remember that has you paying off your entire balance of the loan over 10 years. And so in most cases, most people will find the IDR plans the most affordable plans to stay on for PSLF.
Yeah. There's a bunch of great questions. Andrew, you cut me off when we have to, but we'll just take as many of them as we can and follow up where we can on others. Is there anything, Desiree asks, anything I can do if there's a qualified employer that will not sign the PSLF? I have heard of this. Hopefully it doesn't happen to many people. My suggestion there, and Amy, you chime in, is there's what's called a PSLF help tool. And so they have their old-fashioned Department of Ed become a PSLF ninja, but it actually is a pretty helpful tool, and it walks through scenarios just like this. I know I've walked through it before, and it has a like, what do you do if? And so my suggestion is at studentaid.gov, the PSLF help tool is available, and that would walk you through it. Amy, anything to add?
Yeah, so if they're refusing to sign a form, so one thing to mention is that a lot of this can be done online now, which is really nice. If you have your employer's email address, you can send them an email right away and they can do it online, which is totally new. That like was not the case a few years ago. And it was a lot, you can imagine going back to 2007, trying to get someone to sign a paper form was pretty, terrible. So, if you haven't tried online, that's one option that's often easier for employers. If you can't get them to sign the form, it's possible to submit the form without a signature. There is a box to check on that form that says like my employer's like refusing to sign the form. This is not an ideal option because they'll ask for, backup information like your W-2 or something from that time period to ensure that you actually worked there. So it does require a little bit more legwork, unfortunately, if they're unwilling to sign the form. But there is an option for folks if that's a problem.
Thanks, Amy. Couple real quick ones. Submitted employer recertification and in February, and payments are still showing as ineligible. Should I contact them or wait? I think this is, again, the self-advocacy that you need along with finding help. But the self-advocacy is keep all that documentation of, wait, I submitted it. I know I have the documentation that I submitted it. Here's where they say I was denied or it's not counting for any reason. This is a scenario where you may need to reach out and try to talk to your servicer and say, do I need to resubmit these forms? What's going on here? But that's my best quick hit on that one. And because I want to just touch on a couple others. Someone just wants to confirm that PSLF is retroactive. So if they have 10 years of public service, even if they're going back to school, that's the interesting part of the question. Yes, it's retroactive. Yes, if you've worked for public service for qualifying at the way meet the goals Amy laid out for 10 years, you should be able to go back and retroactively get all of that credit. But if you started school again, that past credit isn't going to count for the new loans. So if you took out new loans, you're on a new timetable with those loans. Let's see, update with Ed Department loans moving over to the Small Business Administration. Well, we don't have a final update because this is Trump administration craziness, but Secretary McMahon, in her conversation with Senator Warren, as was affirmed, said, I don't believe we have the legal ability to do that. Not even we're not going to, but I don't think we have the legal standing to move loans out of Department of Ed. They're going to stay here. So it's just her word, but that is her word at this moment. Here's a tough one from Natalia. 2 payments left to qualify for PSLF. I was under the SAVE plan, but my payments stopped counting for PSLF. So in February, I requested to switch to an IBR plan, but there's been no movement on application or any other updates. Still in a forbearance where my payments don't count. I have not been placed in a new processing forbearance where my payments count. Is there anything I can do besides wait? So you should get those 2 months of credit. And that is the tricky part here is, are they just sitting on your application? And I think the answer probably is yes. They're sitting on 3 million, close to 3 million applications. And so I think if you did apply, you've done the step that you need to do. As soon as they get to processing your application, you should get notification that you're in that processing forbearance. And thankfully for you, if you really just need those 2 months, that should do it. Other people are not going to be quite as lucky there, but yes, you're going to have to wait until they start processing, unfortunately, and I apologize. But you've taken the right step in applying for IBR.
One thing that might help in this scenario is just getting more eyes on it. And so it's possible you could reach out to the California Ombuds and say like, hey, this is my experience, and have her kind of look into it. You could also reach out to your state AG. In addition, we have a casework tool for folks to reach out to their elected members of Congress to talk about issues that they're having with their student loans. Every congressional member's office has a staffer dedicated to casework, which is different than just kind of calling in to say like make a complaint or talk about an issue that they care about. It's like dedicated to helping you with your issues. And so this seems like a great issue to kind of bring to the forefront on maybe a Congress member side too. So it's an option.
One more for you, Amy, if we can. Can you buy back the time? Oh, no, sorry. I want to get to that one, but first, let's do that one first. How can you buy back the time that you were in forbearance? So PSLF buybacks.
Yes. So technically, the Save Forbearance, you are able to buy that time back with the PSLF buyback program. The PSLF buyback program, for those who don't know, is a program where if you have periods of time where you were maybe in public service employment, but you didn't make payments on your loans during that time, maybe you were in forbearances, maybe you were in deferments or in school deferments, or whatever it is, you didn't make payments during that time, there is an option to kind of buy back that time once you've reached over 120 like qualifying months of employment. And so you can only do that after you've hit that 120 mark. But it requires like filling out a form. The process has never been fully implemented, and so it's not foolproof. We haven't heard of many people getting it, honestly, but it is an option. And if it is an option, it should work. And so it is possible to buy back your time for the Save Forbearance. It's possible, I guess is what I'm saying. It's not a fully working program, but, I think you should definitely try.
Thanks, Amy. There's a question here, Angela, when I was between full-time jobs, encouraged to be in forbearance and thought that account adjustment was supposed to count those months, but Mohila said no. And is that accurate? I believe the key might be there that if you're between jobs, you were not working for a public service in a public service qualifying employment during that time. So you would get that credit towards IDR cancellation. If you were in an income-driven repayment plan, then that time should have counted and been picked up by the account adjustment. But it would not have been applied to PSLF unless you certified that time. And if you weren't working for a qualifying employer, you wouldn't be able to certify that time. So I think that's probably what's going on there. I want to say, Andrea, there's a number of really great questions here. I don't know if you can like screenshot them or otherwise preserve them, because I feel bad. I know other people were like, are you going to get to this question? But thank you all so much. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jacob and Amy, for being here and for, staying a few minutes over. I know there have been just tons of really great questions in the Q&A. And so, yeah, I'm definitely keeping a running list of all the questions. And so I will definitely share that back with Jacob and Amy. And so when we send you all the follow-up, we'll send you the recording of the webinar along with some of the links that we talked about today. We'll also try to get maybe like a consolidated document of the Q&A, like the most popular Q&As that came up today. And so we'll probably try to get that out to you all in that follow-up. But again, thank you so much, Jacob and Amy. Super informative presentation. And I wanted to highlight once again, if you didn't get your questions answered in today's webinar, please feel free to reach out to our San Francisco Financial Counseling Program. I've pinned the link to that in our Q&A. So go ahead and sign up and we can have one of our financial counselors meet with you one-on-one. They can get more details about your specific situation and help support you navigate through your student loan situation. Thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you to the Student Borrower Protection Center, Amy, Jacob. Wonderful having you both here, and yeah, we can hopefully we can have you all come back as the situation, the student loan situation continually seems to evolve, and so yeah, we'd love to have you back again.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone. Bye.